All right, good evening, everyone. I am really happy to be back here together with Cyberphoto and to bring you guys another lecture from the Jubilee expedition and from my life as a photographer. Of course, I would like to start with saying thank you to Cyberphoto for giving me the opportunity to speak to you guys. The previous two lectures were really exciting, and it's really exciting to be back again. Tonight's topic is expedition photography, or perhaps more importantly, photography in extreme conditions. And we're going to discuss this topic from various different angles. But before we do, let us just jump in with a little bit of a presentation of myself. And when I was starting to look at this presentation, how to present myself, I realized that everything here is all my years of failures, all the mistakes I've made, all the challenges I've faced. And so I wrote a little bit of an ad for you guys. I'm going to read it to you in case the text is too small on your screens. Pro photographer with 28 years of failures and missed deadlines available for hire. Have experienced every mishap known to photographers, including broken cameras, smashed lenses, crashed drones, and broken memory cards. Survivor of cuts, burns, bruises, concussions, broken bones, stomach parasite, infections, and burnout. Have shot thousands of terrible images, but I won't make the same mistake twice. And the reason I'm not going to make the same mistake twice, in my view, is because process is everything. And over the years I have worked as a photographer, I have developed a bunch of different processes. It might be easy to imagine that tonight on a topic like this we will be talking mostly tech, but that's not true. I would say 50% of this presentation is going to be about the processes to make sure that you get the images that you want, that you need, and the other 50% is the technical side, actually what you need to make it happen. And we're going to do this in the format of a presentation and me talking in the background, and I'm going to be in and out of this little bubble up here in the right hand corner of this image. More proper introduction of myself, perhaps. My name is Jonas Paurell, as I'm sure you know by now. I work as a CEO of Terra Photography Expeditions. That's my main job. And for the last 7 years, I have traveled around the globe many times, leading photography workshops. I've had over 500 participants in my workshops, and I worked probably on 4 continents by now, and there's more to come. If you would like to find more about me, you have my websites here, terra.photography, jonaspaurell.com, and of course the jubileeexpedition.com. And if you want to find me on social media, it's Jonas Paurell on all these places. All right, let's get into it. So what are we really talking about then? What is photography in extreme conditions? Well, we're talking about hot and humid. So, for example, rainforests, right? We're talking about extreme cold. So Arctic regions or anywhere really in the world where it gets really cold. Extremely dusty, dirty environments where it makes shooting really challenging. We're talking about places where there's no infrastructure. You can't clean your gear, you can't dry your gear, and you can't charge your batteries. How do you deal with that? And finally, and the most important one perhaps, mental and physical exhaustion, because that's such a huge part of being on expeditions, being on longer journeys. And I should say in this stage as well that this is not just about expeditions. What I'm about to go through now, I think, is applicable on every photo project, whether it is on a journey or not. But of course, we're going to be speaking more about journeys, travel photography, which is applicable even on family holidays. So I think there's something really in here for everyone. And this is really like a condensation of 28 years of experience as a photographer. So when do we encounter these kind of conditions? On expeditions, of course, longer multi-day backpacking journeys, camping trips with the family or with friends, on extended journeys, and of course on family holidays. I'm sure many of you guys in the audience tonight, or whenever you're listening to this and seeing this, has been trying very unsuccessfully to combine a photo project with a family holiday. It's challenging, it's not easy. So yeah, extreme conditions, mental and physical exhaustion exists everywhere. So tonight, as I said, we're going to be discussing a lot of processes, a lot of workflows. We're going to talk about gear, and the final slide probably tonight is my own personal rules for shooting in hot and humid and cold environments. Kind of a do this, don't do that, you'll break your gear kind of thing in the end there. But let's start from the beginning. Expedition photography or travel photography, whatever you want to call it. What is it? It could be this, right? Out in the Arctic, on the ice desert, as I call it, at least to myself. It could be this, photography in really extreme conditions as well. It could be like this in Greenland, traveling out with boats and heading out to really uncharted territories. It can be landscape images like this one of Greenland, or of this one of the rainforest in South America. Could just as well be this one, a portrait of a boy surrounded by way too many birds in Kathmandu, Nepal. Or it can be this one, a portrait of one of the world's most endangered primates, the brown-headed spider monkey, sitting there staring straight into the camera, into your soul. So I don't really think there is a genre called expedition photography, but I think we're really talking about a bit of everything. Travel photography with some landscape, some people, some wildlife, and some adventure. That's what we're talking about today. So these are the 4 categories that we will be dealing with today, and we'll be dealing with the challenges that exist within these 4 categories. We're going to start this in the way that I enjoy it the most. We're going to look at a flowchart because that's how my brain works and how I think. The basic here, I think, is that if you're in challenging environments, it's really challenging to create. I'm going to list now 6 key challenges that I've faced and identified, at least in my life and in my work. The first one and most important one, physical, mental exhaustion. This leads to either really bad images or no images at all. You're just too tired to deliver on it. The solution for that is super simple, right? Have processes for everything and take care of yourself first. Eat, drink, sleep, prepare as much as you can before you head out. And of course, be technically perfect. We're going to discuss what I mean with that in the slides to come, but that's a concept that you'll see what I mean with in a little bit. We have humidity and changing temperatures, which also leads to condensation. So inside the camera, you will have humidity, and this can fry the camera quite literally. Not very good. Dirt and precipitation, so rain and snow, again, leads to either dirt inside the camera or more humidity inside the camera. And again, you have suboptimal or even broken equipment. The only way to fix these 2 challenges is to avoid it completely. And the way I avoid it is that I have rules, processes for myself, so that I always take care of my gear when I'm out. We have weight and space limitations. Super big challenge when you're out on expedition, especially if you're traveling by foot and you have to carry everything that you bring, right? And you're shooting a variety of different subjects when you're out. This in itself is super challenging because you cannot bring everything that you want. If you're combining landscape, wildlife, and portraits on the same trip or on the same journey, the same expedition, how do you prioritize your lenses? How do you carry all your lenses? That's a big question. I would say plan smart and be creative. Find multiple usages for everything that you bring. And the final one, lack of power and infrastructure. You cannot keep the batteries charged. You're not shooting at all, at least if you're shooting digital, right? And we're going to have a look at equipment that we can overcome these challenges with later on in this presentation. But again, I think everything comes down to processes. Being prepared, having experience in dealing with these environments means that you can mitigate most of these risks or challenges before they become a problem. And that, I think, is the most important thing. We're going to start off with processes because this, I feel, is the absolutely most important and the most valuable thing that I can give you guys in terms of knowledge. So we're going to start with my overall project process, and then we're going to look at my shooting process, how I actually shoot when I'm out shooting. And I think I probably do it a bit different than many people, but who knows? So solid project process gives solid results. That's the basic, right? I'm sure you've all seen this before. You come up with an idea or find an idea, pre-production, production, post-production. I'm going to just give you a quick rundown how I do these different stages because this is absolutely crucial for you to be able to shoot properly when you're exhausted. If you're exhausted, you can't be out innovating. Everything needs to be pre-planned. Everything needs to be functioning. And that's the same if you're on family holiday. If you're too ambitious, you want to go out and shoot a sunrise or a sunset. Well, your family might have a different agenda. Having a plan, knowing what you're shooting and when, making sure that everyone is okay with it before you head out. Even that plan is super crucial. So, idea. First of all, of course, we notice a good idea. And I say notice because I think most of the ideas we get inspiration from somewhere. And that leads to us coming up with an idea for a photo project. I think that the most important and the first thing you should ever do is to try to define your story. The more questions you ask yourself about your story, the better you will tell that story. What is unique about the story? What can you add to the story? Because as a photographer, as an artist, we always add something. At least if you're not a pure documentary photographer, but even they select their subject matters. So they're also adding some kind of judgment or something to their stories. So define that story and define the objective. Why are you telling this story? What do you wish to achieve? And with that, also define your outputs. So an objective in the case of the Jubilee expedition could be to spread knowledge and awareness about the climate crisis. That's one of the objectives we had. Well, how do we achieve that? Just checking now because I got a text, but it's not about the streaming quality because I have a tech sitting over at Cyberphoto and is about to text me if something goes wrong. Anyway, so the outputs always have to lead to the objective. And in this case, it might be, well, create a book, create a film, create all these things. And when you create these things, they lead to people gaining awareness of the climate crisis. So those are outputs that lead to an objective. And finally, I would say commit realistically to the project. If you're working full-time on something else, don't be over-ambitious with your photo projects because you will fail and you'll make people disappointed. Trust me, I've done it myself. I've been there. It's not a pretty thing to be a part of. Pre-production. Again, research and plan your story. Find out who is going to be your audience. If you're documenting your family travels, well, then perhaps it's your friends and family. How would they consume this? A presentation, a calendar, a photo book, or just Instagram? If you have a more ambitious project, you might be out doing a conservation project somewhere. Who do you want to reach? I think it's really interesting and really worthwhile trying to define the age groups, the demographics of your viewers. Who is going to see this and what are they expecting? And more importantly, where do they read it again? Next step here, I think, is making a shot list. This is normally used in film production, but I use it also for still photography. You make a list before you head out of all the images that you can imagine that you would want to be able to tell the story. This list is one of the most liberating things to have when you're out shooting and you're tired, because you're going to be there. What was I supposed to do now? Have I gotten all the shots of today? I'm exhausted. I've already trekked 20 kilometers in the day. It's raining and I just want to sleep. Well, you check your shot list. If there's something crucial there, you keep working. Of course, you have to prioritize the shot list. Most important things at the top of that list so you don't miss it. I am a big proponent of solid planning, logistics, budget, and legal. Just do your research. Make sure that you're allowed to do what you want to do in the way that you want to do it so that you don't have problems down the line. Schedule. I think it's super crucial. If you're going to be out, let's say in the rainforest for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, when and where are you doing? What are you shooting on what day? And understanding that is also going to give you a lot of freedom, because if you're done with the day, you can relax. You're following your schedule. You're on track to success. Equipment, equally important in the pre-production. I like to make what I call an inventory. And this is basically an inventory of all the equipment I will need to be able to deliver the shots that I want to tell my story. And skills, not to be forgotten. I think it's equally important then to make an inventory of the skills you need. If you want to include astro images, astrophotography in your story, but you're not used to shooting astro images, don't save that until you rock up on the location where you're doing your project, or you're on your journey somewhere, which was already really expensive for you to get there. Plan this at home. Practice this at home. It might not be as straightforward as you think, right? And that goes for all things. Time-lapse photography, it goes for using sliders or any other type of equipment. Practice with it. Practice with your storytelling as well. It's not often said, I think, in photography that we should practice, because somehow with the modern cameras, we can all make sharp images and sort of well-exposed images by putting the camera on full auto and just exposing images. Somehow that has given us this kind of freedom to say, like, I'm a photographer. The first day you pick up a camera, you're a photographer. Imagine that you're a tennis player and you pick up your tennis racket and you're expecting to go to Wimbledon immediately, but you've never played a game in your life. It takes years of practice to become good. And the same thing applies with photography, in my view. And of course, finally, practice storytelling. This is something that I don't think a lot of people do, but could benefit a lot of people. Just head out with your camera. Today, I'm not just going to take images of this landscape in this place. I'm also going to document some pictures of how I got there, what kind of scenes there are in general, some detailed shots of your shoes walking in the mud, whatever it is that will tell the story. And practicing that kind of storytelling makes you more aware what is needed for you to tell cohesive and engaging stories. And it's not just about coming home with the perfect, pretty landscape shots. In storytelling, you need a wider array of images to choose from to be able to put them all together and tell a real story. Production then, the fun stuff, right? Follow your plan, schedule, and deadlines. Super important to know. Next point here, really important. Your day always starts the evening before. So when I'm out shooting on a project, I never go to bed until all my gear is packed, cleaned, all my batteries are either being charged or already charged in my bag. Everything is ready to go. And I've also reviewed my schedule and my shot list. If I do that before I go to bed, okay, next morning I wake up half an hour late, well, I can still make it. But if I hadn't done all the prep work before bed, well, I'm going to miss that day perhaps, or at least the morning shoot, right? And then always arrive early. Especially in nature photography, right? We are often shooting places we're not 100% familiar with. You need time to adjust to the scene. You need time to walk around the scene, to feel the scene, to understand the scene, to smell it, to see how the light is affecting the landscape. Try to predict where the light is going. And this you can only do if you have enough time. I always bring one of these butt pads, you know, these little insulated pads. And I normally just go to my scenes. I sit down, I have a cup of coffee, and I just listen and look, get a sense for it. What is the subject matter here? What is important in this scene? And if I just arrived 5 minutes before sunrise, forget about it. I don't have time to find the best composition, as I don't have time to prepare. Be open to unexpected opportunities always. You might meet people on the road when you're trekking into a location. You might meet people in a hotel, in a lodge. One of my super tips here is try to strike up a conversation with the locals. In developing countries, that is often kitchen staff, cleaning staff, reception staff, the people working the service professions around hotels and lodges, because often guides are professional guides that have been either flown in or transported in from other regions where they have perhaps often more education. But their knowledge is to some extent theoretical. The people who grew up there, they are the ones that really know their stuff. So I love to look for opportunities by engaging with the locals that I meet. Prioritize, as always, right? And then I would say shoot your duplicates as well. If you're shooting a crucial scene, a crucial landscape or whatever it is, I always do at least 2 shots of the same thing. I do first one working my normal process flow, and then I reconfirm my exposure, and I reconfirm my composition, and I reconfirm my focus to make sure that of my key scenes there is always a double image of that in case something went wrong with the first one. And here comes another tip. Always shoot the seconds. And with seconds, I mean you want a second angle of your subject matter. You want a second focal length. And you want a second subject also to give context. Imagine you're shooting a scene, you've done your scene, you've done your duplicates of the real image that you need, and then you do some images around it just for context. This leads to great storytelling. Always shoot your seconds. So angle, focal length, and subject matter. And of course, sleep and have fun, because photography is supposed to be fun. And most of the time it is amazing, isn't it? Post-production, we're not going to linger there very long. But basically, it's this: follow your plan, deliver on it. The most important thing here, I think, is to benchmark what you're doing. The outputs that you're producing in your post-production, do they really lead to your objective? Will they engage the audience that you have visualized, researched, and you're targeting? Is it spicy enough, good enough? And of course, you can also say here, well, hang on, this is my artistic vision. Why should I even bother about what anyone else thinks? Well, if it's a pure art project, well, don't. But if you're trying to tell a story and you're working, let's say, a conservation project, you really should. And that's really how I work. This is a super simple workflow. You know, you take yourself from idea all the way to post-production and you deliver on what you need. So now we're going to come back to what I said before, technically perfect. No one could ever be technically perfect. I'm not technically perfect. I never will be. But I want, or I wish, for at least 95% of my images to be sharp, well exposed, and have like an okay composition at least. Because if I can reach 95% of usable images, even if not all of that is going to be my portfolio quality, best type of work, at least then I have images to choose from. 95% is a really ambitious goal when it comes to getting technically perfect images. Really, really ambitious, I think. But it's doable, and I'm going to show you how I do it later on in this presentation, because I have developed techniques that really gets this done. First of all, to be able to do that, you need a solid shooting process, right? And you need to idiot-proof your gear. When I put this presentation together, my wife didn't think I should say that, but I think it's true, because in this case, I'm the idiot. Not saying that I'm an idiot, but I idiot-proof my gear. Because when I haven't eaten in 24 hours, when I'm dehydrated, when I haven't slept for a day or two, when I'm out on an expedition, I turn into something of that. I make mistakes like anyone would. And if I don't have a super solid process, I will make mistakes. And I have made mistakes. I've made all the mistakes, even, I believe. So before we jump into my process, I just want to say this. A good photographer creates good images. I think we can all agree on that, right? But what is it then? First of all, I think it's about technical skills. Being able to use your camera and understand everything about your camera. Practice, practice, practice. Watch tutorials, go on a workshop, go to an education about it, learn, try everything, master your camera. Shooting in auto might be fine for certain things, but it's not going to work for certain things. Second thing, creative skills. Some people will also call this a talent, which is something that is innate in us, that is naturally available in us. But to 90%, I think creativity is a skill, because I think all human beings have creativity when we're young. We just lose it along the way. And as artists, as photographers, it's our job to keep that creativity alive, to be able to see the world with a child's eye almost. I heard someone once mention the example, if you slice a tomato in half and you show a grown-up what it looks like inside, a grown-up will say that's a tomato. And unless that grown-up is hungry, he's not going to bother himself about that tomato. But if you show the inside of that tomato to a child, it has the white seeds with the fleshy things around it, and has the swirly patterns in the tomato. It's a thing of wonder. It's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen if you're a child. We photographers need to develop our creative skills to tap into that kind of seeing, having creative skills. And if we want to fast forward that, especially in, I would say, landscape photography or architectural photography or anything that has to do with composition to a large extent, we can study the Bauhaus movements of Germany, 1940s, where they started researching how humans perceive 2- and 3-dimensional art. There's a bunch of books to read about this, the principles of design and the elements of art. Google it, learn it, and you will advance your photography super fast. After that, all you really need, patience and time, and a lot of it. The more you practice with your camera, the more you understand what it is you're shooting. Like, first time I tried to shoot primates in the rainforest, I didn't do very well, because I couldn't really get to them. I didn't understand if I should chase them or wait for them. I didn't even know if it was ethical to chase them or wait for them. How should I do it? Well, talk to a biologist, Google, learn. The more you learn, the better you will be. And that is what practice, patience, time will give you. And of course, the next has nothing to do with being a good photographer, but I think it's absolutely crucial for photographers to also have good networking skills. Because we need to be seen and to be shared, otherwise we can't make a living in this. And this is both real world skills, people skills, and of course, ability to grow on social media. I think I have more of the former than the latter, because social media is not, perhaps, it's not a love affair for me at least. Okay, we're going to jump into the fun stuff now, the technical stuff, my shooting process, or also known as idiot-proofing your camera. So, I said before that we're tired, we make mistakes. Well, you're going to set your camera so that you can't make mistakes. My solution is this. So I'm a Sony shooter. Majority of my time I also shoot with some Hasselblads, some old Nikons and whatnot, but my main digital camera is Sony A7R3. This picture happens to be of a version 4, but doesn't matter. It looks the same more or less. And I only ever use custom 1, 2, and 3. I don't use any other settings on this camera. I don't use the PASM function. I don't use the auto. I use nothing else but the custom settings. I have my custom 1 set for landscapes. I have my custom 2 set for wildlife. And I have my custom 3 set for portraits, handheld. And what this basically means is not only Sony has these settings, there's quite a few brands that has these kind of settings, but I'm not sure in detail how it works on the other brands. But the beauty on Sony is that I set custom 1, 2, and 3 to be exactly what I want. And when I switch in between them, they're always reset to my base value that I myself have dictated. So if I was up last night, let's say, shooting astrophotography, I will have turned my camera into ISO 1600 or 3200 or something. I will have 10, 20 second exposures. I will have f1.8 or something like this. I've changed all my settings. Now I'm out in the morning and I see, oh, my shutter speed is wrong. I changed my shutter speed. I'm really tired. I didn't sleep much. I fix my shutter speed. I fix my aperture and I forget about the ISO. And I spend 2 hours shooting at ISO 1600 to get really noisy images just because I am tired and made a mistake. By using only these custom functions, I cannot make that mistake. Because immediately when I turn on the camera, I switch from custom 1 to custom 2 and back to custom 1 if I'm doing landscape. If I'm doing something else, I'm switching between the other. So the camera resets every time to my ideal settings, which means I cannot make a mistake when it comes to my settings. They're always back at the base. And I think this is something really amazing and helps with photography. I'm now going to give you actually my settings. These are my base settings, and of course I switch these settings out depending on what what I have in front of my camera, what my scene is. For landscape, it's based on manual. I only ever shoot in manual. I normally use a tripod, so you'll see at the bottom there stabilization is off. But shutter speed is always set at 1/250. f8 as a base, ISO 100. I always shoot RAW to both cards, never ever any JPEGs. I use the flexible spot S autofocus with single autofocus, single shot mode on the exposure. And for wildlife, very simple. Almost all of it is the same, except I have a much higher base shutter speed, so 1/1250, which means I can capture almost any wildlife, almost any bird. Some birds require more, but I can capture anything that is fast moving. It's immediately to whatever is the widest aperture I have on the lens that I put on the camera. So it's already gathering a lot of light. And I have the ISO to auto, and that's super important because that means that the camera is controlling my exposure based on changing only the ISO. And that's the way I like it, because that means I can dictate my shutter speed and my aperture, which is exactly what I want to dictate in this case. Of course, it's high burst mode, it's autofocus continuous. Here it's really important to watch the the exposure compensation dial on your camera, because this one will have impact on the ISO selected, so just be careful with that one. For portraits, it's all the same. 1/250, f8, ISO 100, so back to settings that I have to dictate myself. Continuous autofocal, single shot. One thing I haven't mentioned yet is that you see all of these have zebra mode turn on. And this is something that I know not all cameras support for still images. And in my view, is one of the most powerful things with shooting with the Sony's cameras, and means that I can never fail my exposure. And I'm going to show you that in the slides to come here. So to do that, I'm quickly going to give you my take on exposure. This here is a photograph of my lovely wife, Veronica. She's running in the Swiss Alps. This to the left is the histogram taken from Lightroom for that exact image. The way an histogram works, for those who doesn't know, is that the up and down representation is how many pixels of a specific luminosity that is represented. And the luminosity goes from, on the left-hand side, the blacks, and the right-hand side, the whites. And here you can see on this image that we got a very few number of blacks. We got absolutely no pure white or anything that is blown. And in between, we have a really nice representation of shadows, midtones, highlights. There are a few facts with histograms and with exposure in general. Overexposed highlights cannot be recovered. So if you blow your highlights, there is no data there. There's nothing to recover. Underexposed shadows, so dark areas, can be recovered. But when you do so, you get noise. How much noise you get depends on how underexposed they were and how much you bring them up in post-production in terms of that. So I only have one rule: always expose for the highlight. I'm sure you've all heard people say expose to the right. Well, that's what we're doing here. Exposing for the highlight, exposing for the right. Here is a great example. I just pulled this image out for this presentation. It's not an image I normally perhaps would use, but this is a perfect exposure for me. Look at this histogram here. Every single pixel in, almost every single, there's a few in the midtones there and one or two in the shadows, as you can see on the histogram as well. But almost all the pixels here are in the highlights, which means I have a very, very bright, ugly image. Use less in the current. This is obviously the raw file. But you can also see in the histogram that it's not clipped. There's nothing white in this image that is overexposed or clipped. Well, all of it is overexposed, but there's nothing that is clipped. So this image took me 10 seconds to edit. I brought down the exposure with 1.5 stop. I added a bit of contrast. I added a tiny vignette, and I did like 5 dust speck removals. And now I have a well-exposed image. Perhaps not portfolio quality or nothing I'm proud of, but it's a well-exposed image that shows whatever I took a picture of, right? If you look at them side by side, I've taken an image that looks like really bad because it's overexposed to something that is well exposed. So why do I do this? Well, again, I'm exposing based on highlights. It's a single exposure. Nothing is overexposed, and that's the most important thing here. When I do this, I retain the maximum amount of details in my shadows. So when I print my images, there's no murky shadows. Everything is nice, crisp, and clear. Okay. And again, noise minimized. And I have maximum latitude for post-processing. There's nothing negative with overexposing your images as long as you don't clip your highlights or burn out your highlights. Nothing. However, if you were to shoot on the other side of the spectrum and you try to bring up those images, they will be falling apart because it just doesn't look nice. So how do I achieve this? Well, I use the zebra function, okay? I know that Sony allows for zebra because that's what I do all the time in still images. Certain other brands only allows for zebra function to be used in video. I personally would not buy that camera because I love this function and I use it all the time. So I've just taken 2 pictures with my mobile phone here off the back of my screen as I was actually taking a picture of the very presentation you're now watching. So if you look at the left-hand side on the first histogram here, first you look at the whatever metering exposure I had on the camera that I never look at or use. But if you look at, first of all, the little circle down in the histogram, there is a black space on the very right-hand side there of the histogram indicating that nothing is clipped. But my zebras, those that are in the text where it says post-production, they're actually moving around in this image. And they are telling me that the image is clipped because I have my zebras on the Sony set to custom 109+. I know certain other cameras can do this as well, so you just have to look at your own manual to see how to do this. Custom 109+ on a Sony means that you're clipping in RAW. If you're shooting JPEG, I think it's clipping at 100 because you have a lot less latitude for highlight recovery in JPEG than you do in RAW. So by having these settings means that if I see zebra, it is burnt out. There's no information. If you look at the other one here on the right, you can see the zebra pattern much more prevalent there, because this image, as you can see also from the histogram, is quite blown. But the image on the left, my zebras are telling me that the image is overexposed, is clipping, but the histogram is not. So I think there is a little discrepancy between histogram and zebras, and I think the zebras are giving me much more accurate information. It might very well be that the histogram is slightly less sensitive or something. I don't know actually, but so I always shoot on zebra, and I never ever burn out any images, and I have always ability to recover my shadows. I'm just gonna grab some water. All right, so how do I weave all these different things together? So this is just a landscape process, and I'm not going to give an example for wildlife or for portraits or something, because you can extrapolate that information quite easily just from looking at my landscape process. First of all, I select custom 1, 2, or 3. In the case of landscape, it's custom 1 for me. So I will go to 2 and then back to 1, or to 3 and then back to 1 to reset my settings, because whatever I did before, right? Then I will compose my image. My landscapes are 90% with tripod, so most of the time I'll be on a tripod for that. And then I will change my shutter speed. Okay, most cameras, that's the back wheel, the thumb wheel. So I'll basically flip around on the thumb wheel until I see zebras appearing in my screen. And then I will back down to when the last zebra disappears, and then I will click 1 or 2 clicks, which is 1/3 or 2/3 of a stop, additional back down, so back off on the exposure. And that for me is my optimal exposure. I do the same thing every time. I do the same thing for wildlife. I do the same thing for portraits. I do the same thing for street, for architecture, for holiday, for family, for everything. And my exposure is perfect every time, and I have full control. I am of the view that the more decisions you make as a photographer, the less decisions you allow your camera to make, the more control you have over your images, over your final results. And that is what we want as photographers, as professionals. We want to be able to control everything. So that's why I don't use any auto settings. And this kind of exposure, it's a few like swipes on the thumb wheel and you have nailed your exposure. With zebras, overexposure is so clear and apparent, you can't miss it. The screen is literally moving in front of your eyes if you're overexposing. And this means that you don't need to shoot any auto functions, in my view. But remember, as I said, I use ISO auto for my wildlife, so that can help me with my exposure and speed up my process, because you're reacting to things much faster. Anyway, back to landscape. After I've done this, I have a look at the numbers, my shutter speeds, because if I have a very slow shutter speed, I might, if I'm shooting handheld, I could have a risk of camera shake. Or if I am shooting on a tripod and things in my scene is moving, well, I could have motion blur in my image, and I obviously don't want it. So my next step is just being mindful of that. I do that every time. And after that, I've done these basic things. I allow myself to be creative. If I'm shooting water scenes, I'm definitely going to want to use a 3-stop or a 6-stop ND filter to slow down my shutter speed, to give that the water a bit more life, right? I might want to shoot a scene in super short depth of field to allow the background to be blurry for some reason, if I want to accentuate something in my foreground. Whatever the creative decision is, now is the time for me to do those creative decisions. And then I just focus on my subject. I don't consider any of the really advanced focusing techniques to be very useful, because they take too much time. So I just focus on my subject matters. If I'm photographing mountains, I photograph mountains. If I'm photographing a tree, I photograph the tree, and I focus on these things. I always be careful though, if I have a long lens and I have something that is closer to my camera than, let's say, 5 meters, I start thinking about focus bracketing, taking extra images with different focuses so I can merge them together in post and get, back to front focused images. And if I have a more wide angle lens, something like 1.5 to 2 meters from the lens, I start thinking about focus bracketing. But most of the time I do my best to avoid that, because I absolutely hate sitting in Photoshop trying to merge together different focus stacks, because it never goes the way you want it. And then I expose my image, and the result is image that is perfectly exposed for the highlight, with hopefully good composition, but I know that my exposure and my focus is nailed. It's perfect almost every time. And then in my post-production, I know that for 90% of my images, I need to bring down exposure with 1 or 2 stops. I can even do that in bulk before I even look at my images if I want. but that way I maximize the quality of my images every time. And then expert level back here, consider focus stacking and exposure bracketing. Even with this process of exposing for the highlights, sometimes you get shadows that are really dark. And that can be in situations where 15 stops of dynamic range on a modern camera is not enough. In those cases, I will exposure bracket. If I have stuff near, as I said, I will do focus stacking, even though I always try to avoid. So that was my process. I'm hopeful that people will have questions on this process. You can already now to start writing down questions and comments in the questions field on YouTube, and we will deal with all of those together in one go at the end of this presentation. So next part of my little presentation here is about what to bring. Bring what you need. So we're going to look at lens selection, camera selection, filters, accessories, etc., etc. And we're going to use first an example to just drive the point home how important it is to select the right stuff. This is an actual trip I went on alone, a solo trek. I was out in Sarek National Park in 2021. It's a 10-day trek I was out on, and it's real wilderness. It's the stuff of dreams. It's such a beautiful place. I love this area so much. But yeah, it's far away. There's no resupply. You can't buy any food once you're in there. What you bring is what you got. There's no roads. The only rescue you can have is via satellite to get a helicopter there. So literally you bring what you need. And this is what I brought as a base kit. So clothing, what I was wearing, plus a little bit extra. Footwear, sleep system, you know, tent, sleeping bag, sleeping mat, cooking system. 0.75 kilos of food per day, so 10 days, 7.5. I probably had a bit of extra chocolate with me on this one, so probably more like 8.5 kilos of food. Navigational equipment, and then 6 kilos of camera gear. My starting weight, 23 kilos for 10 days. For me personally, that's 5 kilos more than I wish I had with me. But where can I cut? Where can I cut my weight as an expedition photographer, or as a trekker, or as a journeyer, or whatever it is? How can I? Well, I have to cut the camera. I cannot bring a lighter tent because the one I own is already one of the lightest in the world. Same with my sleeping bag, same with my clothes, same with my backpack, same with all of my stuff. I have lightweight equipment so that I can bring as much camera and food as possible so that I can stay out when I'm actually out. And this means that making the right choices with camera is super important. And more than that, making the right choices with lenses and accessories. So as I've said, I shoot Sony. I still shoot the Sony a7R III. I think that was introduced in 2017, so it's getting old. Still a fantastic camera. If we look at the Holy Trinity, most people who start out in photography, they dream of the Holy Trinity of lenses, right? The 1635, the 2470, the 70-200, all of them in f2.8. That's the, you know, the pro level, fantastic lenses, base kit, whatever you want to call it. That's quite a lot of money as well. But look at that. That's 2.5 kilos. That's a lot of weight to carry in glass. And here I'm going to give you an alternative, a light kit. So Sony 20mm f1.8, 373 gram, right? The 40mm, and then a Tamron 70-180. I own 2 of those lenses that I gave as example here in the light kit. But that brings our lens weight down with a full kilo, so 2 pounds less in terms of weight. That's a huge difference if you're carrying all this around all day, and on top of that you have safety gear and camping gear and trekking gear and etc., right? And I can confidently say that I can take exactly the same images using this light kit with a couple of primes and 1 zoom as I could with the full zoom kit of the Holy Trinity. If I want to go wider than 20, well, I do panoramas. If I need to go a little bit closer than 40, well, I move, I walk. So these kits, like, you don't need, in my view, the heavy stuff. And it's, for many people, even a poor investment to go for this heavy pro-level equipment, because much of the lighter and cheaper equipment is almost as sharp, or at least it's as closely sharp that you can't see a difference in a normal image. You might be seeing it in a test on, you know, a test shot with whatever on a review somewhere, but in real life you don't really see a difference. So all that said, I own a lot of heavy lenses. So this is the kit that I currently use. My zooms on top and my primes on bottom. 1635 2.8. The Tamron 2875, super light, but Sony just released that 20 to 70. That sounds really interesting for someone like me, but I haven't tried it yet, so I have no opinion. We have the Tamron 70 to 180, absolutely fantastic lens that I love to shoot with. I also own the Sony 100 to 400, which is much more flexible if I'm on a trip where I will have to do both landscape and wildlife, or if it's a trip where I don't care about weight, it's a day tour or day trek, or I'm up in Lofoten and I'm sleeping in a hotel every night or something like this, then I don't care about weight so much. And in terms of primes, I got quite a few: 20mm, 35, 55, and the 400 2.8 together with the teleconverter. Now, I would never bring the 400 2.8 on a 10-day trek. I wouldn't do it unless I'm in a really dense forest where light gathering capabilities of the lens is of utmost importance. But then I have to make, some serious decisions about what to not bring. So just going to give you a quick tip. Don't take anyone's advice ever for what lens to buy. Allow your previous photography to make these decisions for you. So if you open up Lightroom, if you use Lightroom, that is, you click you see that little red circle that came on the left, all photos. On the top, you click metadata, you select your camera, you select all lenses, and then you bring out the focal length. If you do that, you basically get a list of how many images you've shot at each focal length. And from there, you can even see which images you shot from which focal length. So if you're noticing that you never ever shoot anything, let's say wider than 20mm, you don't need to bring a 1635. You can bring a smaller, lighter prime of 18 or 20mm instead. That's what I do most of the time, because I don't shoot that much images that are wider than 20mm. So you can make really informed decisions by just analyzing your photography catalog in Lightroom or other programs. But let's get back to the show here. So we had this slide before: people, culture, adventure, landscapes, and wildlife, right? These things require some very different camera equipment. When I shoot people and culture, I like to shoot primes. I like to be between 20 and 70mm or so. I like to quite often shoot with very big apertures to get a lot of light in, but also to have short depths of field. When I'm out shooting adventure stuff instead, I always want to have a zoom, ideally 2470 or the 2875, which I also use. And I typically shoot that between f2.8 and f8. I could even say that here I don't even need a 2.8 lens. f4 as a starting aperture would be fine. For landscapes, I really don't care about the aperture at all, because I only shoot f8 to f11. Almost never ever go brighter or bigger aperture than that. But I do like lenses that are exceptionally sharp, and I prefer them to be zooms. And for wildlife, of course, super different than all of the other ones. You want large aperture, you want to gather a lot of light. That's why I have the 400 2.8. That lens is not needed on a safari in Africa necessarily, but it is fantastic in the rainforest because there's no light in the rainforest. That 2.8 brings you down from an ISO of 12,800 to 6,400 or even 3,200, which means your images look a heck of a lot better. So I never shoot longer than 560mm. I'm not a birder. I think probably the only people that needs anything longer than 560 or 600mm are probably bird photographers or someone else that does a very specialized type of wildlife photography. I like primates and big things better, so I never have a need for anything above that. And my 560 there, that's the 400 with a 1.4 times teleconverter. So again, those were the lenses. How do you choose a camera then? I would say this: the cameras today have never been better. All the cameras that you can buy today from the major brands, the modern things, they are phenomenal. I would say that if you look at ISO performance, image quality, dynamic range, there is almost no difference. There's almost no difference either between APS-C sensors and full frame. Not much, at least. So these are not things that you should even bother about, I think personally, so much when choosing a camera. I would say that instead the shooting process that you implement should be what guides you in your camera decisions. For me, I was trying to figure out for this presentation, what is it that I really care about? First and most important, what lenses are available? What do I need as a photographer? Do they have it? Can I afford it from that brand? Do they allow third-party lenses? If they don't, well, that for me personally would be a big downside, because I do like third-party lenses, often cheaper, lighter, and yeah, that's cheaper, lighter, and just as sharp. Fantastic, right? I like my cameras to be very high resolution because I print big. I do feel slightly limited by my 42 megapixel, but it's still okay. Lightweight. I carry my gear very far, so I do want my stuff to be very lightweight. It needs to be super flexible. I want one camera system to work for landscape, wildlife, portraits, and travel, and street, and everything. Like everyone else, I probably have dreamt about owning a big, medium format camera with a digital back, amazing for landscapes, but I would never be able to shoot wildlife with that. So then I have to carry 2 cameras, and I'm not game for that. So really, it needs to be able to do everything. And for me, I've just landed on Sony full frame, but I think options from Nikon, Canon, Fujifilm, etc. have just as amazing options available. It needs to allow for an efficient workflow. Like I said, if it doesn't allow Zebra in still images and doesn't allow for custom settings, most of them do have custom settings though, I wouldn't buy it personally, because that's my workflow, and it's like ingrained in my spine by now. I don't even have to think. I do the same thing over and over every time I shoot. So I really like and appreciate that, being able to work in that way. I've said that I shoot with A7R3. Natural question right now is, so what about the A7R5 or the Sony Alpha 1? Yeah, I've been asking myself these questions as well. They are really interesting cameras, especially the R5, but A7R3, 42 megapixel, autofocus is good enough. I would say the only reason to change from that camera would be slightly more megapixel, but 20 more megapixel is not that much. Really, it doesn't make a huge difference. But for wildlife, the autofocus would be a real nice help. But I've learned to work with the A7R3, and I nail most of my autofocus even for wildlife anyway, especially when working with primates that are quite big. So it's not necessary. I would say that, and also for the sake of sustainability, let's not just keep buying new gear. If you have a camera that works, well, keep using it until it's dead and gone, and then try to fix it if you can. But of course, I do have my eyes on the other ones, and I think I might try to borrow one of the A7R5s just to test it out, because that looks like a really amazing thing. Quickly now, accessories. I know that I've already been speaking for 50 minutes, and we're not going to be that much longer. I might have 50 minutes more, and then we're going to do a quick Q&A. Do you need filters? Oh, yes. Oh, yes, and yes. However, I would never advise anyone to buy a square filter kit. That is 800 to 1,000 grams of filters, whereas the same filters in 82mm round filters is 190 grams. And I know that because I actually weighed my filters. I always bring filters with me wherever I go, and I bring 3, 6, 10 stop ND filters, and I bring a circular polarizer, and I use these filters absolutely every time I'm out shooting, and I wouldn't go anywhere without it. And that's one of the weight penalties I'm willing to take. But that's 190 grams, and that's acceptable. And I always buy them in 82mm, which means I can use step rings and they will fit all my lenses. Camera bags, I think, is super challenging topic. I used to have one of these, Love Pro Tactic, fantastic bag. 2.8 kilos. What is that, like 6 pounds? Today I use one of these. Well, actually I have 4 different camera cubes, and I use a Ortli backpack. This saved me 1 kilo of weight almost, just by going for this backpack. And this backpack, when I'm in the rainforest, I can even go swimming with this backpack. It's waterproof down to 1 meter, which means that my camera equipment is always protected, nice and dry. Doesn't matter what the rainforest throws at me. Doesn't matter what a desert throws at me. I'm always dry, and my camera equipment is always dry. But of course, this is only a backpack that I can use on a day tour. When I do multi-day trekking, when I'm bringing my big backpack with food and tent and all that, I use the system that is here on the right. I got a bunch of different Sea to Summit kind of like dry sacks. One of my dry sacks is the one with the straps. It becomes this little, well, not very sexy looking backpack, but it's fantastic and functional. I bring a bunch of these wraps to protect my camera gear. And then I have one Love Pro top loader, zoom, whatever it's called. This entire kit, all these things, weighs somewhere between 364 and 450 grams, exactly depending on how many f-stop wraps. There are other brands of wraps as well, Domkey, etc. But this kit is fantastic. I can get this inside my backpack that I'm carrying. I can throw and carry that little Love Pro bag on the outside, which means I'm always ready to shoot, even without removing my big backpack, which, like we remember, 23 kilos or 50 pounds. I don't want to remove that if I don't have to. And it's just a super flexible system. And that's how I do it in all the conditions that I work in. And by the way, I should say, because of those dry sacks are waterproof, again, even if I get completely submerged in water, these C2 Summit dry sacks or any other dry sacks will keep the camera equipment completely dry. Field maintenance and protection, let's just bring them all out. This is what I bring with me on almost all trips. I always bring a bunch of APS-C swabs, and I use APS-C swabs even though I have full frame, because I think it's just easier to get it in there without fiddling around too much. Some cleaning liquid and an air blower. I bring it everywhere I go, because when you work in the environments I work with, you're going to have a dirty sensor more than once, more than twice, actually sometimes even every day. I got some Allen keys just to adjust my tripod. I got a bunch of lens cloths. I always bring a shower cap that I've stolen from I guess they're for free, but I've taken from the last hotel I stayed in. And then I have a think tank emergency rain cover for my 400-2.8. Of course, that lens is very weather sealed, but if you're out for a week and you don't have a chance to dry the equipment in between, eventually you have condensation build up in the lens, in the camera, and you get condensation in there, and then you basically can't shoot until that dries out. And that's just, so I always bring rain cover for my gear, even though it is weather sealed and weather protected, because you're changing lenses and etc. It always gets wet eventually. I always bring a sound kit. I work with a lot of Audio-Technica mics and some Rode mics as well. I work with external audio recorder, but I also make sure that, depending on the situation, how much weight I can take, that I have mics that go straight into my Sony. And I always bring with me one of these tiny little Zoom audio recorders, because I don't know, I just find that audio is such an amazing way to create more immersive storytelling. If you're making videos, well, audio together with photos also makes fantastic videos. So I always bring an audio recorder. I always record audio wherever I go. I personally love it, the way it can bring images to life by just giving that second sense a little bit of a tickle when you're showing images. My safety kit, always with me, as important as my shooting kit. I always have a satellite communicator, Garmin InReach Mini. It's a fantastic little device. It hasn't saved my life yet, but it has allowed me to stay in contact with my family, with business colleagues, etc. when I'm out on an expedition, and it's my preferred way of communicating. I actually prefer this one over the sat phone, because the sat phone is so complicated to use and expensive, and etc. I always have some food and snacks. Even if I'm out on a day hike, I have food and snacks with me. I always have a water bottle. If I'm in a place with a lot of water, I might bring some kind of purification thing instead of a water bottle, just to make sure that I can drink however much I want. I always bring one of these space-age NASA survival blankets thingies, first aid kit, and of course, since I'm a certified international mountain leader, I know how to use my first aid kit. I have done probably 3 or 4 first aid courses by now, and I keep doing a new one every 2 years to keep my certification intact, so I actually know how to use my first aid kit, and that is super important for yourself and for the people that you might be traveling with. I bring some extra clothes. I always bring a head torch, a knife, map and compass, and of course I adapt my safety kit depending if it's summer, winter, whatever the conditions might be, right? And I never leave home without this stuff. I never leave home without it. The Garmin InReach Mini comes with me everywhere. It's a lifeline. It's a way for me to make sure that whatever happens to me, my wife can track me. She knows exactly where I am. If I get injured and I'm not moving anymore, she can send rescue to where my thing is, and I can speak with her, and I can speak with the rescue services if need be. Okay, we're going to have a quick look at power in the field. I'm not going to go through this entire presentation here, or this entire slide, because we don't have so much time left, but basically I shoot with Sony batteries, right? That's 2200 milliamp hour. I get about 400 to 500 shots, normal landscape kind of stuff. If it's really cold, I get about 350 shots on one battery. If I'm shooting burst mode for wildlife, I probably get 800, 900, 1,000 shots or something like that. I've never counted, but it's a lot more, at least I know that. And on a typical day, a typical trek of, let's say, a week, I shoot maybe 10 scenes a day landscape and 300 images per day. That's 2,000 or so images in a week, which means I need 4 batteries, but I never bring that. Instead, I bring 2 batteries and I bring a power bank. I use exclusively Anker power bank. I don't know why. It's just the first one I ever bought, and I keep buying them since then. And I got 6 different versions of those. Of course, if I shoot wildlife, I need a lot more power banks than that. But you can see here on the right-hand side, if I'm out for 2-3 days, how many batteries do I need? How many power banks do I bring? The next line here is solar chargers. Solar chargers is often, I would say, on a week that is on a trip that is less than 10 days. If you're not doing a lot of video, it's not worth carrying because it's heavier than the batteries would be. If you're out for more than 10 days, then one of these small Anker 21 or 24 watt solar panels that they have, they are valuable and fantastic. They're slow though. You charge maybe one of these tiny little power banks of 10,000 milliamp hours. It will take about a full day of sunlight, and I mean direct sunlight without clouds. One of those weighs 400 grams, so that's the same weight as bringing another entire power bank. So that's what I mean, is if it's less than 10 days, don't bring a solar charger because it's pointless. But I also have a 100 watt, one of these mega big, you can see it here in the image at the bottom there. It's a 2 kilo solar charger. This is for expedition usage. You will charge a normal 10,000 milliamp power bank in 4 to 6 hours. And then you can see the other devices on the right there that also takes power and needs to be charged. So we finally have reached the tips and tricks I promised in the beginning. So remember that I had 2 problems. Humid and changing temperatures leads to condensation, which in turn leads to broken equipment, or at least suboptimal equipment. And we have dirt and precipitation, which again leads to either dirty sensor or broken camera, right? My rules are as follow. In hot and humid conditions, never, ever allow the camera to become wet. Unless you can dry it. So if you're staying in a hut, a lodge, yeah, if it rains a bit on the camera, who cares, right? Because you can dry it in the evening. But if you're camping, no way. Always rain cover on. Never let anything get wet, because in hot and humid conditions, even if you think your camera gear is drying, it stays humid. All right, so never let it get wet. So that's the think tank rain cover that I use again. Next step is avoid condensation at all cost. Okay, so let's say you're staying in a nice lodge. You're going to have AC in your room. It's nice and cold in there compared to outside. Don't keep your camera there, because if your camera is really cold in the morning, you go out and you're shifting temperatures, you might get condensation in your camera. It's always much worse bringing a cold camera into a warm environment than bringing a warm camera into a cold environment. So, but just put your camera on your balcony. Allow it to be already outside temperature when you start shooting. I've even had situations in the rainforest where I have gained 100 or 200 height meters walking up on a ridge line. And as I have gained that elevation, I've basically gotten condensation in the camera because of changing temperatures, just 1 or 2 degrees up and down, because the humidity is so strong. So keep your camera always in outside temperature. Many lodges around the world has something called a dry box that the tourists never know about. It's basically a big wooden box with a bunch of light bulbs inside of it that keeps that nice and hot and dry. Well, use it. The hotels have no problem you sticking a couple of cameras and lenses in there. It's just that they don't offer it because they don't think people want it, but it's really useful. So always ask wherever you're staying, if you're staying in a safari lodge or in a rainforest lodge somewhere, if you can use the dry box. And then I would say bring an extra camera. Make sure that it's in a Ziploc bag, and make sure that it is with some of these kind of like, humidity absorbers. If you got some of them, if you got some spare camera, you might not have one, then you have to make do with what you have, right? But bring it and put it in a Ziploc bag, put it in a separate bag. Don't take it out and use it. Don't use both cameras at the same time. Keep a backup camera if you can, because that could be really valuable. Every night, clean your equipment and then store it again outside in the right temperature. A tip for you as a human being. I have had fungi growing in my skin in the rainforest. It's not very nice. I've learned the hard way that every night you wash every single piece of clothing in your sink. Okay, so for me, I normally just bring, when I go to rainforest, I bring 2 sets of safari clothes. So a shirt, long sleeve, pants, and every night I wash that, and the next day I wear the other one. And I do this because I don't want the spores from fungi, etc., to grow in my clothes and grow in my skin, because that can be really, really uncomfortable, and it has happened to me. So I wash my clothes every day. Every third day, every second day or so, I go to the kitchen if I'm staying in a lodge. I ask for some chlorine, bleach in English, and I dilute that with water, and I rinse the inside of my rubber boots, because again, fungi is growing there. If you're in the rainforest, you want to avoid that, trust me. For cold, my rules: never allow your camera to get wet. Again, wet camera freezes, condensation problems. For cold, more important even than the rainforest is to never allow your camera to get warm. Keep it cold if you can. You know, if you have to bring your camera inside, you leave it in your camera cube or in your camera backpack, and you leave it there for a minimum of 2 hours, ideally longer, so that the camera can slowly increase temperature to room temperature. Because if it's minus 20 Celsius outside, you bring a camera straight in, that camera will be dripping with water within minutes. And it's not just dripping with water on the outside, it's dripping with water on the inside. So that is a very, very fast and easy way to break a camera. So don't do it. Again, backup camera, leave it outside if you can at all times. Lithium-ion batteries, avoid charging them if they're frozen. So under 0 Celsius, use either hand warmers, put the batteries in your pockets, warm them up, because you can damage lithium-ion batteries when they're frozen. So just try to avoid that. And the same goes for power banks. Don't charge your power banks necessarily if they're too cold. Just put them in some kind of bag together, or even a sock together with a chemical hand warmer or something. And of course, don't leave your battery in your necessary camera. As I said before, I get about 350 or so shots in the cold with my Sony battery. Normally I get 450 or so. So that's, you know, what, 20-25% difference. That's quite a big difference. So always try to keep your batteries warm. Keep them in the pocket, put them back in the camera when you need to shoot, and then keep doing that back and forth. And you can save quite a lot of power and get more shots out of it. And I will say here also, buy original batteries. I once bought, I'm not going to say the brand, but I bought a couple of batteries on, actually from B&H Photo in the US when I was traveling through there. And it was from an old Nikon camera I had before I switched to Sony. And they managed about 500 shots, the same as the Nikon batteries did in normal temperatures. But up in minus 20 in Sweden, they lasted, I think it was like 20 to 25 shots. Yeah, so that's not acceptable. So since then, I've never ever again bought any other brand than the original brands. And that was that. And now I'm getting into the bonus, because as a conservation photographer, I cannot do a presentation without giving you a very super short, fast ethics lecture. And whilst I give you that, maybe you want to start typing in questions and comments that you might have in the comments field. First of all, I would like to say, never cause harm in nature, ever, for any reason, okay? Understand the ecosystems that you're traveling through, because walking through mosses and lavas and lichens in one country might not be a problem, whereas in other countries, especially up in Arctic climates where growth is so incredibly slow with short summer seasons and cold summer seasons, you could be damaging nature for many decades into the future. Understand the implications of sharing where you're at when you travel, when you're sharing images on social media, Instagram and whatnot. You might not have to tag everything, because if it's an amazing spot, people will go there. And if you want to go back, well, it might not be amazing when you get back, because it might be ruined. Always follow all laws, all regulations. Do not ever feed wildlife. Of course, if you're visiting, I don't know, like a specific bird place where they have feeders, or even bear photography in Finland where they're feeding the bears regularly. Yeah, these bears are used to that feeding, and the people there, they know they have to keep feeding them, and they're obviously creating a dependency between themselves and the animals. Yeah, of course, in such a situation, they're already feeding them. There's not much you can do except ignoring them and not going there. But if you are going there, sure, that's fine, but never ever feed other animals, because you're creating a resilience for them. Never touch an animal. Never touch their nesting place, because if they come back and they smell you, that's not nice. And then I would say share as much as you can, your passion, your photos. Create a community around what you're doing. Become an ambassador for conservation, for nature. And finally, leave no trace. The leave no trace is a bunch of principles. You can Google them online, but it's very basic stuff, which I think should be common sense for everyone. And that finishes my lecture for today. My next lecture is now going to be in April, and that is going to be about creating and printing a photography exhibition, and that is the preparation work I'm doing for my exhibition opening at Färgfabriken in Stockholm in January 2024. And we're now going to jump into Q&A. If you don't have time or energy to ask any questions now, find me on, for example, Instagram or Vero at Jonas Paurell, and I'll be happy to strike up a conversation with anyone on those forums as well. All right, we are now going to jump into me having a full face here. I'm back. I'm going to see, just give me a minute here to have a look at the comments field, because I obviously have been talking so much, I haven't had a chance to read any comments. There is a comment here. I'm hopeful bringing the A7R5 to low photo in a couple of weeks and would be happily to let you play with it. All right, so I'm through Terra Photography Expeditions. I have 2 upcoming trips to low photo, and it looks like I'm not sure who it is, but one of my guests perhaps is online and listening, and he is bringing that camera. Exciting! I would love to play with that. Thank you. I know that I've gone through an incredible amount of information tonight, and I hope that everyone has had something interesting or fun or useful to learn. Oh, it's Nikolai. Hi, Nikolai. That was the comment from before, by the way. And if you don't have questions now, that's totally fine. I know it's a lot to take in when it's a presentation like this, when I've been so active. But I'm going to give everyone another minute. And in that minute, feel free to... Oh, here we go. Questions. From Carl. Have you ever had camera equipment break during an expedition, a journey or an expedition? If so, what was the consequences? All right, yes, I have plenty. I have dropped and broken maybe 2 lenses, 2 camera bodies, and I have broken 2 drones. I've crashed them myself. Thankfully, one of them was my wife's. Well, I was not actually thankful. That was even worse because it was not mine. I have now most recently in the Arctic expedition I was leading, I broke almost every single piece of audio equipment I brought. So really expensive audio recorders, they froze to death up there. And yes, I've broken a lot of it. The consequences is that, and the consequences from that Arctic expedition was that I didn't get the audio I needed. So I'm going to have to record some of the audio here in Sweden instead and make it sound like I was in the Arctic. It's not as genuine and as real as I wanted, but the audio recorder was broken, so I don't have a choice. Of course, you can make do. That's what I said before. You have to be creative. You can connect a microphone straight into the Sony camera and record video and use the audio from that mic and not use the video, for example. You can also connect some mics to a smartphone and use that as an audio recorder. So it's all about being creative and try to find different ways. But yeah, the most challenging breaks I've had has been full cameras. Like I dropped one into a waterfall in Scotland when I was out filming. I couldn't keep filming, so that kind of ruined much of the videos from that. But generally speaking, it's okay. I got another question here from Nikolai. How do you pack and carry all the camera equipment on planes and through security? The 400mm, I have a flight case for that. So it's, don't remember the bag, but it's one of those big plastic rugged bags with a camera insert in it. Plenty of protection. You can literally run a car over that thing and it will probably still function, that bag. So I actually check in my 400, never had a problem with that. And the other stuff, if I need to, if I feel like I'm going to get into trouble at a check-in, because that's normally when they get you, I typically just hang a camera with a big lens around my neck. I might put 1 or 2 lenses in some pockets and do the weigh-in if there is a weigh-in. But I find most of the time they don't really check your weight of your bag so much, because if they did, I would be in trouble. And then I just carry it on. I just make sure that the only thing I'm carrying is my laptop and my camera gear, and I try to limit myself as much as possible. Sometimes I give my wife some of the camera gear as we're going through check-in or when we're boarding the plane, and then I take it back on the other side so she doesn't have to carry it. I just try to be flexible as much as I can. But generally, I'd say checking in camera gear is not a huge problem. I've never had anything stolen or broken. But of course, I use really good protective bags for that. All right. I think that's enough questions for tonight, everyone. Unless someone sneaks in a final last-minute question now. Find me on Instagram at Jonas Paurell and ask me more questions there. Interact with me. I love talking to people, and I love sharing, and I love building a community, because I think that's a great way to stay in touch with people with like-minded interests. I'm super grateful to Cyberphoto for allowing me to be here tonight and to talk about these topics. I really enjoyed writing this presentation that I showed you, because, like, for example, the processes I showed you, I've only ever had them before in my head. This is the first time I ever write them down. And that was really useful for me, because it crystallized some things, and now I have it on paper, so it's really nice. I hope these things are useful also for you. If you would like a paper copy of some of the processes, just send me a message and I'll try to help you out. Again, Cyberphoto, thank you so much for tonight. And thank you everyone who came to listen to me. I'm really grateful to have had the opportunity here. So I wish you all a good night, and that's all from me. Good evening, guys.